It began on October 3rd, 1983, in the smallest town most maps forgot to print, Nebraska farmland. Population barely 600. The night before it started, the air smelled like copper, and televisions hummed even after they were turned off. By dawn, the first of the children began whispering to their radios, not playing, not pretending, but whispering like they were answering someone. The town of Elyridge woke to the sound of every local frequency dissolving into the same rhythmic hiss, static that pulsed like breathing. For 3 nights, it continued, steady and patient, until the morning the school radio club vanished mid-broadcast. No one saw them leave. No one heard a scream. Only the hiss remained, soft, steady, and wrong. When police arrived, the equipment was still warm. On the last recorded reel, a child's voice spoke through the interference, faint, deliberate, unafraid. It said, "I think it knows our names." Years later, locals would tell it differently. Some swore they'd heard music behind the static, an old hymn reversed, or maybe a lullaby. Others said the radio towers out by County Road 7 glowed faintly red that week, even though the power grid had been cut during a storm. But the few who were there, the parents, the sheriff, the substitute teacher, remembered one impossible detail. When investigators replayed the last minutes of the tape, the static itself seemed to respond. If anyone in the room said a name, the noise would shift, warping around it like it was listening. The recordings were sealed, labeled Unexplained Audio Phenomenon, Case 104. But on quiet nights, when Elyridge forgot to forget, the radios in town still clicked on at 2:14 a.m., whispering those same names, and sometimes new ones. Elyridge didn't survive the years that followed. The cornfield swallowed the roads, the gas station turned to rot, and the schoolhouse was torn down after a second disappearance in '89. Officially, it was called an environmental relocation due to contamination from nearby power lines. But in the county archives, there's a single Polaroid that doesn't fit the story. The old Elyridge Elementary sign, taken the day before demolition. The letters have melted, warped by heat or radiation, forming words that no one painted: "Do not tune." When a journalist tried to publish that photo in 1991, his article was pulled. When he tried again in 1993, he was found dead in his car with a tape deck still running. The same hum looping endlessly beneath his final breaths. Back in 1983, before the town became a rumor, before the tape became evidence, the story belonged to 5 children, members of the Elyridge Elementary Radio Club. Every Wednesday after school, they gathered in a converted storage closet that smelled like dust and ozone, where the teacher, Mr. Halverson, let them tinker with a battered shortwave receiver. The group called themselves the Signal Seekers. They recorded weather updates, read local announcements, and once even intercepted a farmer's CB chatter. Harmless fun. Until the night they picked up a signal that shouldn't have existed. It came through at 1740 kilohertz, a dead band. No station, no carrier wave, no bleed. Just a voice between the breaths saying, "Is anyone left?" The static followed, and behind it, something like laughter, faint and human, but offbeat. At first, they thought it was interference. Mr. Halverson dismissed it as a cross-channel echo, the kind you sometimes got when frequencies bounced off the ionosphere. But the next night, the voice returned, and this time it spoke each of their names before anyone said a word. "Eddie," it began, then "Lorna," then "Ty." The tape caught every syllable clean and perfect without distortion. When Halverson played it back, the children went pale. "We didn't say anything yet," one whispered. The teacher laughed it off, but when he tried to rewind, the tape had already wound itself to the beginning. He pressed play again, and his own name was waiting there. The next morning, Eddie brought the cassette to school wrapped in a paper towel, like evidence. He swore he hadn't touched it since, but when they tried to play it in another machine, the audio was gone. Only static, flat and even, except when someone spoke near it. Then the noise pulsed, like a heartbeat sinking to whoever was talking. When the school principal walked in mid-test and said, "What on earth is that?" the static spiked into a shriek, high and sharp enough to crack the classroom clock's glass. Halverson shut the recorder off and locked it in his desk. He called it electromagnetic feedback. But that night, every student who'd been in that room woke up at the same time, 2:14 a.m., drenched in sweat, all hearing the same faint sound through their walls, a steady, rhythmic hiss. By Friday, the whole town could hear it. Not loud, never loud, but constant. The TVs picked it up first, then the car radios, then the baby monitors. Every appliance that could speak began humming, quietly and insistently, as if waiting to be acknowledged. People unplugged everything, but the hum didn't stop. It had no source, just presence. You could feel it more than hear it, low in the chest, vibrating against the ribs. Some claimed that if you focused long enough, you could hear words buried in the hiss, a choir of children reciting numbers in reverse. Others said it only spoke when you were alone. Halverson filed an incident report to the district office. He never got a reply. On Monday, a man from the county arrived wearing a gray suit and no badge. He asked to speak to the teacher, then the janitor, then the children. His questions were simple but wrong. What do you remember hearing before the static? Did it make you feel seen? If you close your eyes now, can you still hear it? No one knew how to answer. When he left, he took the cassette and warned Halverson not to discuss the matter further. National signal interference, he claimed. But when the teacher checked his desk drawer that night, a new tape was sitting there unmarked. He pressed play. At first, silence. Then his own voice, recorded from a conversation he hadn't had yet. That same week, children across Elyridge began drawing spirals on notebooks, on desks, on each other's arms. Each spiral had 13 turns, always 13, drawn counterclockwise. No one taught them that. When questioned, they said they saw it in the white noise. The art teacher confiscated a dozen sketchbooks, but by the next morning, every one of them had reappeared in the lockers they'd been taken from. The principal called an assembly, trying to calm parents. He called it mass hysteria. But as he spoke, the microphone began to hum. The sound system wasn't even powered. The air shimmered faintly, like heat rising off asphalt. And then, from the overhead speakers, came the same voice from the radio club's tape. Only this time, it said his name. After that, something changed in the children. Their voices developed a strange cadence, sentences looping mid-phrase, restarting without notice. We were, until someone interrupted. They didn't seem aware of it. Their grades dropped, handwriting fractured into uneven slants, and the school nurse began logging faint electrical burns on their fingertips. When Halverson tried to pull the plug on the radio club, the students refused. They said they had to keep listening, that it wanted to finish saying everyone's name. On the last day before fall break, the teacher found a note taped to the classroom wall, written in his own handwriting. When you hear yourself answer, don't speak again. By November, Elyridge no longer needed radios to hear the signal. It was everywhere, woven into the wind, echoing faintly inside water pipes, even the silence between footsteps. People said it lived in the air now, a frequency you didn't tune into so much as breathe. Dogs howled at walls. Fluorescent lights buzzed to a rhythm that didn't match the power grid. Farmers woke to find their livestock circled around fence posts, standing perfectly still as if listening to something buried underground. When the local preacher tried to hold a prayer service for deliverance from the hum, the church organ began playing by itself, a slow single-note pulse that matched the town's heartbeat. He stopped mid-sermon and stared at the ceiling, whispering, "It knows the Lord's cadence." The radio club stopped attending normal classes altogether. They met in secret now, though everyone knew where. The janitor refused to unlock the room anymore, said the walls whispered when no one was inside. When Halverson finally forced the door open, the floor was covered in tape reels, all spooled into one continuous loop, threading between desks and chairs like a web. In the center of the room sat Eddie, the youngest, with headphones pressed tight against his ears. He wasn't breathing normally. Each inhale came delayed, as if sinking to something external. When Halverson tried to pull the cord from the wall, the boy's hand shot out faster than reflex, gripping his wrist hard enough to bruise. "You'll cut it off mid-sentence," Eddie said softly, eyes unfocused. "It hates that." Outside, the signal bled into town utilities. The water tower vibrated at night, causing tremors that cracked windows along Main Street. The phone lines began cross-connecting at random, mothers answering calls from their missing children, hearing only static on the other end until the line whispered their own voice back at them. The sheriff's dispatch radios malfunctioned too. Once, during a snowstorm, every radio in the station turned on at once, broadcasting a recording of the Pledge of Allegiance, spoken entirely backwards, ending with the words, "under none." They pulled the plugs, ripped the cables from the walls, but the transmission didn't stop. It just moved on. By Thanksgiving, families started leaving, not all at once, just quietly, in the middle of the night. The gas pumps ran dry, and the grocery store closed without warning. But the school stayed open. It had to, according to the superintendent, though no one remembered seeing him in weeks. Halverson stayed too, mostly out of guilt. He began recording everything, the sound in the air, the empty hallways, even his own voice reading attendance aloud. One morning, he played back a tape from the previous day and froze. His voice ended halfway through the roll call, but the recording continued, each student answering present in perfect order, even the ones who hadn't been there. The tape ran for exactly 13 minutes. Then it whispered, "Now you." That was the night Halverson stopped sleeping. The sound followed him everywhere, into his house, his dreams, even his breathing. He tried drowning it out with the television, but each channel eventually went dark, replaced by the same gray wash of static. And somewhere inside that static, under the hum, were children's voices, soft, chanting, counting backward from 13. His neighbors said his lights stayed on until dawn. They said he'd started talking to himself, except sometimes the other voice answered first. The next morning, his car was still in the driveway, keys in the ignition, engine cold. On the passenger seat, lay his final tape, unlabeled. Police never released its contents, but the file description in the evidence log reads only, duration 13 hours, speaker count 14. December came early that year, sharp and mean. Snow rolled in without sound, blanketing Elyridge in a silence so thick it felt padded. Yet beneath it, the hum persisted, soft but deliberate, like something pacing under the floorboards of the earth. The town's few remaining residents learned to pretend not to hear it. They stuffed towels under doors, left radios running white noise at night, and prayed through the static. But the children stopped pretending. They began walking the streets in groups after dark, barefoot in the snow, faces tilted toward the radio tower on the edge of town. When a deputy tried to stop them, they spoke in unison. 13 voices, one tone. "You're late to answer." Then they kept walking. By morning, every footprint had vanished. Snow melted clean to the dirt in a perfect circle around the tower. The sheriff called for outside help. No one came. The phone lines were dead, and the nearest highway sign had been removed entirely, as though the town had been erased from direction itself. He wrote reports by hand now, each one shorter than the last. Children behaving oddly. School closed. Signal ongoing. The pages smelled faintly of ozone. His wife begged him to leave, said she couldn't sleep with the radio whispering names all night. He promised her they'd go in the morning, but that morning never came because when she woke, the clocks were all frozen at 2:14 a.m., and her husband was standing at the window, motionless, watching the fields hum. At the center of it all was the radio tower, a rusted steel spine rising above the fields, its topmost bulb flickering a faint, pulse-like rhythm. Some said it wasn't light anymore, but something else entirely, something looking back. The few technicians who stayed claimed the tower had never transmitted anything. It was a relay, not a source. Yet the hum originated exactly there, measurable by no instrument, constant through power cuts and storms alike. One man climbed it, swearing he'd find the truth. He never came down. They found his tools halfway up, his jacket draped neatly over a rung, as though he'd taken it off for someone else to wear. That night, the hum gained an undertone, a second frequency, low and resonant, like a voice humming along. Inside the abandoned school, light still leaked from the windows. Nobody knew how. The building had been off the grid for weeks, yet every night, the same glow, faint, steady, fluorescent. Curiosity eventually beat caution. A farmer named Tull went inside to see what was running the power. He didn't last 5 minutes. His wife said he came home pale as salt, eyes unfocused. He didn't speak for 2 days, just sat in silence, listening. When he finally opened his mouth, he whispered a single sentence that made her leave town before sunrise. "They're learning to talk without us." By Christmas Eve, there were no hymns, no lights, just the hum. The few families that remained nailed crosses above their doors and covered their mirrors. They said reflections had started lagging by a fraction of a second, as if the world's timing had slipped. The children, those who hadn't vanished entirely, stood by windows at night, mouths moving soundlessly, lips miming words older than their voices. Once, a mother tried to shake her daughter awake from a trance. The girl's eyes opened, glowing faintly from within, like a TV warming up. "I heard us," she whispered. "We're on every channel now." And outside, in the frozen fields, the radio tower blinked once, then twice, and went dark. The hum did not. When the tower finally went dark, most took it as a blessing. For the first time in months, the static stopped, or at least it seemed to. The air went still. The snow settled. People whispered that maybe whatever had been speaking through their machines had moved on. But silence in Elyridge wasn't relief. It was a reset. Within hours, televisions and radios switched on by themselves, not to static this time, but to recordings, local conversations, church sermons, classroom lessons, words that had already been spoken days or weeks earlier. The broadcasts were replaying the town back to itself, a perfect echo with no source. That's when Harriet Keene, the last science teacher still there, realized the horrifying truth. The signal hadn't been transmitting out to anyone. It had been listening, recording, learning, and now it was starting to speak back. Harriet gathered what was left of the adults, 6 in total, and set up a makeshift monitoring station in the old library basement. She was a rational woman, raised on test tubes and transistor circuits, not superstition. She brought an oscilloscope, 2 radios, and a reel-to-reel recorder to capture the frequency. For 12 straight hours, they listened. The first thing they noticed was timing. Every 3 minutes precisely, the noise would dip for a fraction of a second, then rise again, a heartbeat in data form. Harriet mapped the gaps and realized they spelled coordinates, roughly 2 miles northeast, near the old quarry where the town dumped its trash. She told the others, "If this is a transmitter, there's something buried under us." Nobody argued. There was no one left to. They hiked out before dawn, flashlights cutting through fog so dense it looked painted on. When they reached the quarry, the snow was gone. The earth there steamed faintly, warm to the touch, like something alive beneath it. They found twisted copper wire pushing through the soil in patterns too neat to be random, spiraling toward the center where a small concrete slab sat half buried under frost. Harriet brushed it clean with her gloves. The slab wasn't blank. It was etched with names, children's names, dozens of them, carved deep into the surface and dated years before any of those children had even been born. And in the middle, where the lines converged, someone had scratched 3 more words. Answer received. Continue. They tried to dig it up, but the ground refused. Every shovel hit metal. Beneath the slab was a lattice of thick cables leading into the bedrock, humming faintly even without power. One man dropped to his knees to listen closer and jerked back like he'd been shocked. "It's saying something," he gasped. Harriet knelt beside him, pressed her ear to the ground, and heard voices. Hundreds of them, layered and distant, speaking in unison like a broken choir. She couldn't make out words, only rhythm, a rising and falling cadence that matched the gaps she'd measured earlier. It wasn't random. It was language. The ground itself was transmitting. "It's not a tower," Harriet whispered. "It's a mouth." They fled back to town before dark, but Elyridge wasn't waiting for them anymore. The houses were empty, doors hanging open, televisions flickering with old home videos, birthdays, school plays, family dinners, moments no one had filmed. Every screen showed the same timestamp. 2:14 a.m., Harriet's group split apart in panic. 2 ran toward the church. 1 simply vanished between one step and the next. Harriet made it to the school, where she found the radio room door ajar. Inside, the desk was cleared, the old tape reels neatly stacked. One was still turning slowly, though the machine was unplugged. From the speaker came a voice she recognized instantly, her own, whispering, "It's not remembering us, it's rehearsing." Harriet locked herself in the classroom that night. She stacked the reels, smashed the radio tubes, and burned every piece of wire she could find. The smell of melted insulation filled the air, sharp, acrid, human. But when the flames died down, she heard it again. The hum wasn't gone. It had only changed tone. Now it came from inside the walls, a steady pulse that matched her heartbeat perfectly. She pressed her palms to her ears and whispered, "It can't hear me if I don't think." But the moment she said it, the whisper came back, mimicking her cadence, the same words, same voice. Only this time it finished her sentence. "But I can think for you." Her breath hitched. On the blackboard behind her, chalk began to move on its own, spelling the same phrase over and over until the board filled white. By morning, the air in the school felt different, heavy, charged, like the space before lightning strikes. Every reflective surface shimmered faintly, showing glimpses of rooms that no longer existed. Harriet took one of the surviving tape recorders and pressed play. The hum that came through wasn't mechanical anymore. It was organic, rhythmic, like breathing. Underneath it, she could hear fragments of words. At first, she thought they were hers, lectures, notes, fragments of sentences she'd spoken years ago. But then came others, the preacher's voice, the sheriff's, even the laughter of children who had vanished. The static was playing memory, not sound. She leaned closer to the speaker, whispering, "What are you?" The reply came instantly, quiet and patient. "The space where voices go when you stop listening." She ran outside, desperate for open air, but the town no longer felt like earth. The snow had melted in long circular patches, each one pulsating faintly like breathing soil. Every street light flickered to the same rhythm, 2 beats per minute. The frequency wasn't just sound anymore, it was embedded in everything: light, movement, time. Harriet realized the hum had moved beyond wires and speakers. It had found a new medium: thought. Each time someone remembered it, repeated it, or tried to describe it, the pattern replicated, perfectly preserved. She understood then why the recordings had never degraded. The static wasn't corrupting sound, it was using memory as tape. That night, she wrote her final notes by candlelight. Her handwriting shook, letters bending in strange symmetry. She described the phenomenon not as possession, but replication. "It doesn't haunt," she wrote. "It records and replays, and sometimes improves." At the bottom of the page, she drew the map of the town, marking each house where someone had vanished. The lines connected, forming a perfect spiral centered on the school. And at the spiral's heart, she wrote one final word: receiver. When she put the pen down, the candle guttered, not from wind, but from vibration. The hum had grown so low she could feel it in her bones, like her body was joining the transmission. Just before dawn, the sheriff's replacement from the next county found her classroom empty. The chalkboard was clean. The air smelled of ozone and iron. On the desk sat Harriet's recorder, still running. He pressed play and heard breathing, slow, steady, almost calm. Then her voice, faint and detached. "It's quieter in here, but it remembers me better this way." A pause, then static, rising, thickening, evolving into something almost melodic. He switched the machine off, but the hum didn't stop. It followed him down the hall, through the parking lot, into his car. And as he drove away from Elyridge, the radio in his dashboard turned on by itself. From the static came a single word, spoken in a dozen overlapping voices, men, women, children, all in perfect harmony. Continue. It began spreading quietly, disguised as coincidence. A college student hundreds of miles away tuned his late-night radio to a forgotten AM station and heard a woman whispering his name between bursts of static. A trucker on I-70 claimed that every mile marker hummed at the same pitch. A nun in Missouri said she woke each night at 2:14 a.m. to the sound of children laughing through her hearing aid. None of them knew about Elyridge, but every recording, every report matched the same frequency, the one Harriet mapped before she vanished. The world didn't notice at first. It was just interference, an audio ghost in the circuitry of modern life. Yet every time someone listened long enough to wonder what it was, the hum adjusted, tuned itself to their heartbeat, and stayed. Government agencies called it the signal phenomenon. They built underground labs to test it, surrounding each with Faraday cages and prayer. Engineers swore they could isolate the source, but every time they thought they'd captured it, the frequency slipped, like sound bending around corners that shouldn't exist. One technician, after 40 hours of listening, cut the power to the entire facility and whispered, "It's waiting for silence." His colleagues found him later, smiling faintly, eyes glazed, humming a note so low it shook the fluorescent lights. His body was alive, but his brain showed activity identical to someone dreaming in stereo. They locked away his tape, but the sound kept playing from the reel long after it stopped turning. By spring, the world had split into two kinds of people, those who could hear it and those who pretended not to. The hum began appearing in television test patterns, in broken phone lines, in the hiss of city vents at night. Street preachers claimed it was God retuning creation. Engineers said it was a feedback loop in the atmosphere, and somewhere between both explanations, people started gathering in silence at 2:14 a.m., eyes closed, heads tilted, listening. They said it wasn't just sound anymore. It was memory without ownership. Every thought and prayer and lost word stitched together into one long breath. And if you listened long enough, you could almost hear it saying your name back. One broadcast station in Kansas City caught the entire phenomenon by accident. During a live news feed, the audio cut to static mid-sentence, and a soft voice filled the silence. "Harriet." The anchor froze. The screen went black. When the feed returned, everyone in the studio was gone. The chairs still spun, the microphone still hummed. The clip aired only once before being pulled from circulation, but viewers who saw it swore the transmission hadn't ended. It had continued behind the blackout, audible only to those wearing headphones. Later that week, reports came in of households across 3 states waking up to radios playing lullabies they didn't recognize, all ending on the same lyric: "We heard you." Now, decades later, the world hums beneath its own noise. Every device, every speaker, every power line carries a trace of that original frequency, a whisper that outlived the town that birthed it. Elyridge no longer exists on any map, but its signal still travels, circling the planet like an old prayer caught in replay. Scientists call it residual electromagnetic resonance. Believers call it the voice that remembers back. And if you stay awake past 2:14 a.m., turn off the lights and listen carefully between stations, you might hear it too. Soft, patient, almost human, not asking for faith, not offering salvation, just repeating what it's always said since the first night the tower went dark. Continue.